6 months after joining Master Sergeant Chin's Special Operations team, Maria found herself in the most challenging situation of her military career. Intelligence had identified a high-value target operating from a compound in the remote Kunar province, and the team was tasked with capturing him alive. The mission would require precision, stealth, and flawless execution under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. The target was Ahmed Nazir, a senior insurgent leader responsible for coordinating attacks throughout the region. His capture would provide valuable intelligence about terrorist networks and could significantly disrupt enemy operations. However, his compound was heavily defended and located in territory where coalition forces rarely operated. Mission planning took place over several weeks as intelligence analysts gathered detailed information about the target location and enemy defenses. Satellite imagery revealed a fortified compound surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Conservative estimates suggested at least 20 armed fighters protected the facility at any given time. Maria participated in every planning session, providing medical input on casualty estimates, evacuation procedures, and trauma treatment capabilities. Special operations missions often resulted in complex wounds that required immediate expert care. Her expertise had become integral to tactical planning rather than merely supportive. The compound was located in a valley accessible only by narrow mountain paths that could easily be defended by small groups of fighters. Helicopter insertion was impossible due to the terrain, meaning the team would have to approach on foot through hostile territory. The nearest coalition forces were over 50 kilometers away, making external support unlikely. Master Sergeant Chin's plan called for the team to split into 3 groups during the assault. Alpha Team would create a diversion at the front gate, Bravo Team would breach the compound walls from the east, and Charlie Team would secure the main building where the target was believed to be located. Maria would accompany Charlie Team due to the higher probability of casualties during building clearing operations. Advanced reconnaissance revealed that the compound's defenses were more sophisticated than initial intelligence had indicated. Motion sensors, night vision equipment, and communication systems suggested that the insurgents were well-funded and professionally trained. The mission would require the team to overcome technological advantages as well as numerical superiority. Weather conditions added another layer of complexity to the operation. Heavy rains had made the mountain trails treacherous, and cloud cover would prevent air support even if aircraft were available. The team would be operating without backup in an environment where a single mistake could result in disaster. Maria prepared her medical equipment for the types of injuries most likely to occur during urban combat operations. Close quarters fighting often resulted in multiple penetrating wounds, severe bleeding, and complex trauma that required immediate intervention. Her aid bag contained advanced supplies that were not typically available to regular infantry medics. The infiltration phase took 2 days as the team moved through mountainous terrain while avoiding enemy patrols and local villagers who might report their presence. Maria's physical conditioning had improved dramatically during her time with special operations, allowing her to keep pace with soldiers who were among the most elite in the military. Navigation through the mountains required careful route selection to avoid observation while maintaining progress toward the objective. Master Sergeant Chin relied on GPS coordinates and detailed topographic maps, but the final approach would require visual navigation to avoid detection by enemy security measures. The team established a final observation post approximately 1 kilometer from the target compound on the evening before the assault. Advanced optics allowed them to study the defenses in detail and identify weaknesses that could be exploited during the attack. Maria observed the compound through binoculars, noting potential casualty collection points and evacuation routes. Enemy activity patterns indicated that the compound's garrison was alert but not expecting an imminent attack. Guard rotations were regular but not overwhelming, suggesting confidence in the remote location and natural defenses. The insurgents appeared to be relying on early warning systems rather than massive defensive preparations. Master Sergeant Chun made final adjustments to the tactical plan based on real-time observations of enemy positions and activities. The assault would begin at 3 o'clock hours when enemy alertness was typically at its lowest point. Timing would be critical as the teams had to coordinate their movements without radio communication until the assault commenced. Maria reviewed medical evacuation procedures one final time, identifying rally points where wounded soldiers could be collected and treated before extraction. The remote location meant that medical evacuation would be extremely difficult, requiring the team to be prepared for extended operations with wounded personnel. The assault began exactly on schedule as Alpha Team initiated their diversion with explosive charges at the compound's main gate. The detonation created enough confusion to mask the approach of Bravo and Charlie teams, who moved against their assigned objectives while the defenders responded to the obvious threat. Maria followed Charlie Team through a breach in the compound's eastern wall, staying close enough to provide immediate medical support while remaining far enough back to avoid interfering with combat operations. The balance between medical readiness and tactical positioning required constant adjustment as the situation developed. The main building proved to be more heavily defended than intelligence had indicated. Charlie Team encountered fierce resistance as they cleared rooms methodically, searching for the high-value target while neutralizing enemy fighters. The close-quarters combat was intense and chaotic, with split-second decisions determining the difference between success and failure. Sergeant First Class Michael O'Brien, the team's communications specialist, was wounded by small arms fire during the initial breach of the building. The bullet had penetrated his shoulder and caused significant bleeding that required immediate attention. Maria moved to his position under fire, applying pressure dressings while the rest of the team continued the assault. Working in the confined space of a partially destroyed building while combat continued around her tested every aspect of Maria's training and experience. She had to provide life-saving medical care while remaining aware of the tactical situation and ready to defend herself if necessary. The complexity of the situation was unlike anything she had encountered during training exercises. O'Brien remained conscious and able to communicate, allowing Maria to assess his condition quickly and determine that the wound was serious but not immediately life-threatening. She administered pain medication and established an intravenous line while using her body to shield him from potential enemy fire. The search for the high-value target continued as Charlie Team systematically cleared the remaining rooms in the main building. Each room presented potential threats and required careful tactics to avoid casualties while ensuring that no enemies were left behind to attack the team from their rear. Master Sergeant Chin's voice crackled over the radio with reports from Alpha and Bravo teams. The diversion had been successful in drawing enemy attention, but insurgent reinforcements were approaching the compound from multiple directions. The team would need to complete their mission quickly and withdraw before being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Maria coordinated O'Brien's evacuation to a secure position while monitoring radio traffic for reports of additional casualties. Special operations missions often resulted in multiple wounded soldiers requiring simultaneous treatment, and she needed to be prepared to triage patients based on the severity of their injuries. The high-value target was located in a fortified room on the building's second floor, protected by his personal security team and sophisticated electronic equipment. The assault on his position required explosive breaches and careful coordination to avoid killing the man they had come to capture alive. Specialist Sarah Kim, the team's explosives expert, was wounded during the final assault when an insurgent grenade exploded near her position. The blast caused multiple fragment wounds and possible concussion, requiring immediate medical evaluation. Maria had to divide her attention between two wounded soldiers while combat continued. Kim's injuries were more complex than O'Brien's wounds, involving multiple penetrating fragments and potential internal trauma that was difficult to assess under battlefield conditions. Maria applied emergency treatment while preparing both casualties for evacuation, knowing that definitive medical care would be required as soon as possible. The successful capture of Ahmed Nazir marked the completion of the primary mission objective, but the tactical situation continued to deteriorate as enemy reinforcements surrounded the compound. Master Sergeant Chun made the decision to move immediately to the alternate extraction point, fighting through several enemy positions during the withdrawal. Maria found herself managing two wounded soldiers while participating in a running firefight through difficult terrain. Both casualties were able to move under their own power with assistance. But their conditions were deteriorating and would require advanced medical care within hours. The alternate extraction point was a small clearing approximately 3 kilometers from the target compound, accessible by helicopter but only during daylight hours. The team would have to hold defensive positions for several hours while waiting for extraction, a challenging prospect given their casualties and limited ammunition. Defensive preparations at the extraction site required careful positioning to provide security while creating space for medical treatment of the wounded soldiers. Maria established a casualty collection point in the most protected area available while maintaining readiness to participate in combat operations if the position was overrun. O'Brien's condition remained stable, but Kim was showing signs of internal bleeding that concerned Maria. Field treatment options were limited, and she would need access to surgical facilities to properly address the injuries. Radio communication with medical evacuation coordination was intermittent due to the remote location and mountainous terrain. Enemy probing attacks began shortly after the team reached the extraction point, indicating that insurgent forces were attempting to locate their position. Master Sergeant Chun distributed his soldiers to provide overlapping fields of fire while conserving ammunition for more serious assaults that were likely to follow. Maria monitored both wounded soldiers while preparing contingency plans for more casualties. The defensive position was strong but not impregnable, and determined attacks could overwhelm the small team. Medical supplies were limited, and she would need to make difficult decisions about treatment priorities if more soldiers were wounded. The first serious attack came at dawn as approximately 15 insurgent fighters attempted to overrun the extraction site from 2 directions. The assault was repelled by disciplined small arms fire and well-placed explosive devices, but several team members sustained minor wounds during the engagement. Maria treated fragment wounds and minor injuries while continuing to monitor the more serious casualties from the compound assault. Her medical supplies were being depleted rapidly, and she began prioritizing treatments based on available resources rather than optimal patient care. Communication with extraction helicopters was finally established as the weather cleared enough to permit flight operations. However, the pilots reported enemy activity in the area that made immediate extraction dangerous. The team would need to suppress enemy positions before helicopters could safely approach the landing zone. Master Sergeant Chun coordinated a final assault against known enemy positions while Maria prepared the casualties for rapid evacuation. Timing would be critical as the helicopters would be vulnerable during landing and takeoff operations. Every second on the ground increased the risk to aircraft and crew. The extraction was completed successfully despite continued enemy fire from distant positions. Maria supervised the loading of wounded soldiers while the rest of the team provided security for the vulnerable aircraft. Professional helicopter crews and disciplined ground troops made the dangerous operation appear routine despite the extreme circumstances. During the flight back to Base Viper, Maria continued monitoring her patients while reflecting on the mission's events. Both wounded soldiers would recover completely, the high-value target was in custody, and no one had been killed during the operation. By any measure, the mission had been a complete success. The debriefing process revealed the exceptional nature of what the team had accomplished. Capturing a high-value target from a heavily defended compound without suffering any fatalities was extremely rare in special operations. Maria's medical expertise had been crucial in keeping wounded soldiers alive during the extended firefight and withdrawal. Master Sergeant Chin's evaluation of Maria's performance during the mission was outstanding. She had provided expert medical care under the most difficult conditions while contributing to the team's tactical effectiveness. Her evolution from field medic to special operations team member was now complete. The success of the mission led to Maria being recommended for promotion to Petty Officer First Class, a significant advancement that recognized her exceptional performance and growing responsibilities. Special Operations Command's valued medical personnel who could function effectively as both medics and combat soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell called Maria to her office to discuss her future career options. The successful completion of Special Operations missions had opened opportunities that were normally available only to soldiers with much more experience. Her unique combination of medical expertise and proven combat effectiveness made her valuable to multiple units. The choice between remaining with special operations teams or accepting assignment to more senior medical positions would determine the direction of Maria's military career. Both paths offered opportunities for advancement and service, but they would require different types of preparation and commitment. Maria chose to remain with special operations, accepting the challenges and rewards of serving with elite military units. Her experience had taught her that medical skills could be most effectively applied when combined with tactical expertise and the ability to operate under extreme pressure. The final phase of her deployment involved training new medics who were assigned to work with special operations teams. Maria's experience provided valuable insights into the unique requirements of medical support for elite units, and her teaching helped prepare the next generation of combat medics. Her journey from field medic to special operations team member demonstrated that exceptional performance under pressure could create opportunities that transcended traditional military career paths. Courage, competence, and dedication to duty had transformed her from support personnel to an integral member of the most elite military units. The recognition of her contributions extended beyond her immediate unit as senior commanders throughout the theater of operations became aware of her exceptional performance. Her reputation as both a skilled medic and reliable soldier opened doors to assignments and responsibilities that would have been impossible through conventional career progression. Looking back on her deployment, Maria realized that the ambush that had first tested her courage had been the beginning of a transformation that had changed not only her military career, but her understanding of her own capabilities. The decision to risk her life to save wounded soldiers had revealed qualities that she had not known she possessed. The lessons learned during her time in Afghanistan would influence her approach to challenges throughout her military career and beyond. The combination of medical expertise, tactical awareness, and moral courage that had made her successful in combat would serve her well in any situation that required decisive action under pressure. Her story became an inspiration to other medical personnel who faced similar choices between safety and duty. The example she had set demonstrated that individual soldiers could make a difference through courage, competence, and commitment to serving others regardless of personal risk. As Maria prepared for her next assignment, she carried with her the knowledge that exceptional circumstances sometimes required exceptional responses. Her willingness to act decisively when lives were at stake had transformed her from just another field medic into a leader whose example would inspire others for years to come. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Viper felt smaller than usual as Maria sat across from Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base commander. 3 days had passed since the ambush, and the formal investigation into the incident was now complete. Maria's hands remained steady as she faced the officer who would determine the consequences of her actions during the firefight. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had 22 years of military experience and had commanded combat units in multiple deployments. She understood both the importance of military discipline and the complexities that arose when soldiers faced life and death decisions in the field. The report on her desk contained detailed statements from every member of the patrol, and the picture it painted was complicated. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez sat to Maria's left, his expression neutral but supportive. Despite his initial anger at her disobedience during the ambush, he had come to understand her motivations and had written a statement that acknowledged both her breach of orders and her successful medical intervention. Military leadership often required balancing competing priorities, and this situation exemplified that challenge. Lieutenant Morrison occupied the chair next to Rodriguez, still processing his own role in the incident. As patrol leader, he bore responsibility for everything that happened during the mission, including Maria's unauthorized actions. His report had been honest about the tactical situation and the difficult decisions that all soldiers had faced during the engagement. The base medical officer, Major Patricia Hawkins, had also been invited to attend the debriefing. As Maria's supervising physician, she provided expertise on medical protocols and the obligations that medical personnel faced in combat situations. Her presence indicated that this case was being treated as more than a simple disciplinary matter. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell began by reviewing the basic facts of the incident. The patrol had been ambushed while conducting routine reconnaissance, resulting in 4 casualties from the lead vehicle. Hospital Corpsman Santos had violated direct orders by leaving safety to treat wounded soldiers under fire. Her medical intervention had been successful, and all 4 soldiers had survived their injuries. The legal aspects of the case were clear-cut from a military justice perspective. Maria had received direct orders to remain in her vehicle until the tactical situation was secure, and she had deliberately disobeyed those orders. Military discipline was based on the principle that orders must be followed without question, particularly in combat situations where hesitation could result in casualties. However, the practical results of Maria's actions complicated the legal analysis. The wounded soldiers had required immediate medical attention that could not have been provided from the safety of her vehicle. Waiting for the area to be secured might have resulted in preventable deaths. Her medical expertise had enabled her to save lives that would otherwise have been lost. Major Hawkins spoke about the medical obligations that all healthcare providers accepted when they took their oath of service. The primary duty of medical personnel was to preserve life and reduce suffering whenever possible. These obligations sometimes conflicted with military orders, creating ethical dilemmas that had no easy answers. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell acknowledged the complexity of the situation while emphasizing the importance of military discipline. Orders existed for good reasons, and soldiers who ignored them put themselves and their comrades at risk. However, she also recognized that exceptional circumstances sometimes required exceptional responses. Maria was asked to explain her decision-making process during the incident. She described her assessment of the medical situation and her conclusion that immediate intervention was necessary to prevent deaths. She acknowledged that she had violated orders, but maintained that her medical training and ethical obligations had left her no choice. The discussion revealed the tension between different types of military training and obligations. Combat training emphasized following orders and maintaining unit cohesion, while medical training emphasized immediate response to preserve life. Most situations did not create conflicts between these principles, but the ambush had forced Maria to choose between them. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez provided his perspective on the tactical situation during the firefight. He explained that his order for Maria to remain in safety had been based on standard military protocol and his assessment of the threat level. He admitted that her successful medical intervention had changed his understanding of what was possible under fire. Lieutenant Morrison discussed the leadership challenges that the incident had created. As patrol leader, he needed his soldiers to follow orders without question, but he also needed them to show initiative and adaptability in rapidly changing situations. Maria's actions had demonstrated both insubordination and exceptional courage. The investigation had included interviews with all members of the patrol, and their statements revealed a complex range of opinions about Maria's actions. Some soldiers admired her courage and medical skill, while others worried about the precedent set by ignoring direct orders. The diversity of views reflected the genuine difficulty of the ethical and military questions involved. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell announced her decision after careful consideration of all factors involved. Maria would receive a formal reprimand for disobeying orders, but she would also be recommended for a commendation medal recognizing her courage and medical expertise. The dual nature of the disciplinary action reflected the complex nature of her actions. The reprimand would become part of Maria's permanent military record and would be considered in future promotion decisions. However, the commendation would also be included in her file, providing context for her actions and recognizing the positive results they had achieved. Military leaders reviewing her record would need to consider both aspects of the incident. Major Hawkins suggested that the case be used as a training example for medical personnel throughout the command. The ethical dilemmas that Maria had faced were not unique, and other medics might encounter similar situations in the future. Developing clearer guidance for such scenarios could help prevent similar conflicts between medical and military obligations. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell agreed to implement new training protocols that would address the conflicts between medical and tactical considerations. Medical personnel would receive additional instruction on tactical decision-making, while combat leaders would get better training on medical capabilities and limitations. The goal was to prevent future situations where soldiers faced impossible choices. Maria accepted the disciplinary decision without complaint, understanding that military discipline required consequences for unauthorized actions even when they produced positive results. She had known the risks when she chose to leave safety, and she was prepared to accept responsibility for her decisions. The meeting concluded with Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's observation that combat often created situations where there were no perfect solutions. Leaders at every level had to make difficult decisions with incomplete information and conflicting priorities. Maria's case would serve as a reminder that courage sometimes required accepting personal risk to do what was right. 2 weeks later, Maria found herself facing a different kind of challenge. Intelligence reports indicated increased insurgent activity in the region, and Base Viper was being reinforced with additional troops and equipment. The tactical situation was becoming more dangerous, and medical personnel were being asked to take on expanded responsibilities. Captain James Torres arrived at Base Viper as the new operations officer, bringing experience from previous deployments and a reputation for aggressive tactics. His approach to counterinsurgency emphasized rapid response and decisive action against enemy forces. Medical support was an important part of his tactical planning, but it was subordinated to combat objectives. Maria's reputation had spread throughout the base following the ambush incident. Soldiers who had not been present during the firefight had heard stories about the medic who had risked her life to save wounded comrades. Some details had been exaggerated in the retelling, but the core facts remained accurate. The new mission assignments reflected the changing tactical situation. Patrols were being extended in duration and scope, with soldiers spending longer periods outside the safety of the base. Medical support was being distributed across multiple units, requiring medics to operate with greater independence and responsibility. Maria was assigned to work with a special operations team that conducted reconnaissance missions deep in enemy territory. The assignment was both an honor and a challenge, as special operations units demanded the highest levels of skill and reliability from all personnel. Her performance during the ambush had earned her the opportunity, but she would need to prove herself again. Master Sergeant David Chun commanded the special operations team with quiet competence and unshakable confidence. He had served in combat for over 15 years and had worked with numerous medical personnel during that time. His standards were extremely high, but he was fair in his assessments of soldier performance. The team consisted of 12 highly trained soldiers who specialized in different aspects of reconnaissance and direct action missions. Each member was expected to perform multiple roles and to support teammates when necessary. Medical training was considered essential for all team members, but having a dedicated medic provided additional capabilities. Maria spent 2 weeks training with the team, learning their procedures, and proving her ability to keep up with their demanding physical standards. Special operations missions required soldiers to carry heavy equipment over long distances while maintaining complete silence and tactical awareness. The physical and mental demands were significantly greater than regular infantry operations. The training covered advanced first aid techniques that all team members needed to master. Maria taught classes on trauma treatment, medication administration, and medical evacuation procedures. Her expertise was valued by soldiers who understood that their lives might depend on immediate medical care in remote locations. Master Sergeant Chin evaluated Maria's tactical skills as well as her medical abilities. Special operations teams could not afford to carry personnel who were not fully capable in combat situations. Every team member needed to be able to fight effectively while performing their specialized duties. The first mission came 3 weeks after Maria joined the team. Intelligence had identified a suspected insurgent training camp in a remote mountain valley, and the team was tasked with conducting surveillance and gathering information about enemy activities. The mission was expected to last 4 days and would take them far from any support. Maria carried the standard medical equipment plus additional supplies needed for extended operations. Her pack weighed over 60 pounds, but she had trained extensively to build the strength and endurance needed for long-range reconnaissance missions. Special operations medics were expected to be as physically capable as any other team member. The team inserted by helicopter during the pre-dawn hours, landing in a remote valley several kilometers from their objective. The terrain was mountainous and difficult, with steep slopes and loose rock that made silent movement challenging. Weather conditions were clear but cold, with temperatures dropping below freezing at night. Maria found herself thinking differently about tactical situations than she had during regular infantry operations. Special operations missions required constant awareness of multiple factors including enemy positions, escape routes, communication schedules, and medical evacuation plans. The margin for error was much smaller than during conventional operations. The surveillance position overlooked the suspected training camp from a distance of approximately 800 meters. The team established a concealed observation post that provided excellent visibility while remaining invisible to anyone in the valley below. Advanced optics allowed them to document activities and identify key personnel. During the second day of observation, the team witnessed insurgent training activities that confirmed intelligence reports about the camp's purpose. Maria observed the proceedings through binoculars, noting details that might be relevant to medical intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. Her medical background allowed her to assess things that other soldiers might overlook. The insurgent camp appeared to house approximately 30 fighters who were receiving training in weapons use, explosive devices, and small unit tactics. The presence of foreign instructors suggested connections to larger terrorist organizations. The intelligence gathered during the mission would be valuable for planning future operations against the group. On the third day, the tactical situation changed dramatically. A routine insurgent patrol unexpectedly approached the team's position, forcing them to remain completely motionless for over 4 hours while enemy soldiers moved within meters of their hiding place. Discovery would have meant certain death or capture for the entire team. Master Sergeant Chun made the decision to abort the mission early due to the increased enemy activity in the area. The team had gathered sufficient intelligence to justify the operation, and remaining longer would expose them to unnecessary risk. Special Operations Doctrine emphasized achieving objectives while minimizing casualties. The extraction required movement through enemy territory during daylight hours, significantly increasing the danger to the team. Maria found herself relying on tactical skills she had learned during her time with the Special Operations Unit. Her movements were silent and purposeful as she followed the soldier ahead of her through the dangerous terrain. The team reached the extraction point without incident, but the helicopter was delayed due to enemy activity in the area. They spent 6 hours in a defensive position, prepared to fight their way out if discovered. Maria checked and rechecked her medical supplies, knowing that casualties during the extraction would be particularly difficult to manage. When the helicopter finally arrived, the extraction was completed quickly and efficiently. The team loaded their equipment and intelligence materials while maintaining security around the landing zone. Within minutes, they were airborne and heading back to Base Viper with valuable information about enemy activities. The mission debriefing revealed that the intelligence gathered by the team would be used to plan a major operation against the insurgent training camp. Air strikes and ground assault forces would eliminate the facility and capture or kill the foreign instructors. Maria's medical observations had provided useful information about enemy medical capabilities. Master Sergeant Chin's evaluation of Maria's performance was highly positive. She had demonstrated the tactical skills, physical endurance, and mental toughness required for special operations missions. Her medical expertise had been an additional asset that enhanced the team's capabilities without compromising their primary mission. The success of the reconnaissance mission led to Maria being assigned as the permanent medic for Master Sergeant Chin's team. It was a significant promotion in responsibility and reflected the confidence that special operations commanders had developed in her abilities. She would be participating in the most dangerous and important missions conducted by the base. News of her assignment reached the regular infantry units, where her former colleagues expressed a mixture of pride and envy. Assignment to special operations was considered the highest honor available to enlisted soldiers, and Maria had earned it through demonstrated courage and competence under the most difficult conditions. Lieutenant Morrison, her former patrol leader, congratulated her on the assignment while expressing regret at losing such a capable medic. The regular infantry units would continue to face dangerous missions, But they would not have the benefit of Maria's exceptional medical skills and tactical awareness. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez offered practical advice about working with special operations teams. He had served with similar units during previous deployments and understood both the opportunities and challenges that such assignments presented. His guidance helped Maria prepare mentally for the increased responsibilities she would face. The nature of special operations missions meant that Maria would be operating with much greater independence than she had experienced as a regular infantry medic. Special operations teams frequently worked in small groups far from support, requiring each member to make critical decisions without guidance from higher headquarters. Medical planning for special operations missions involved considerations that did not apply to conventional forces. Evacuation options were limited, communication with medical facilities was restricted, and the types of injuries encountered might be different from those seen in regular combat operations. Maria studied advanced trauma procedures that were specifically relevant to special operations medicine. Penetrating wounds from small arms fire, blast injuries from explosive devices, and environmental injuries from extreme weather conditions all required specialized treatment protocols that differed from conventional medical approaches. The psychological aspects of special operations medicine also required additional preparation. Soldiers who were wounded during covert missions might not be able to call for help or receive immediate evacuation. Medical personnel needed to be prepared to provide extended care under extremely difficult conditions. Training with the Special Operations Team continued to challenge Maria in ways that her previous assignments had not. The physical demands were greater, the tactical situations were more complex, and the consequences of failure were more severe. However, she found herself thriving in the environment that demanded excellence in every aspect of performance. Her relationship with the other team members evolved from professional respect to genuine camaraderie as they trained together and prepared for future missions. Special operations teams developed strong bonds between members because their lives depended on absolute trust and mutual support. Master Sergeant Chun began including Maria in tactical planning sessions where her medical expertise could influence operational decisions. Medical considerations sometimes affected route selection, timing, and contingency planning in ways that were not obvious to soldiers without medical training. The integration of medical and tactical planning represented an evolution in Maria's role from someone who treated casualties after they occurred to someone who helped prevent casualties through better planning and preparation. It was a level of responsibility and influence that she had never imagined when she first enlisted as a medic. As her assignment with the Special Operations Team became permanent, Maria realized that her career had taken a dramatic turn from the path she had originally planned. The ambush that had tested her courage and medical skills had opened doors to opportunities that would never have been available through conventional career progression. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Viper as Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Maria Santos finished her pre-dawn equipment check. Her medical bag contained everything she might need during the day's patrol: bandages, morphine, saline bags, tourniquets, and the small miracles that could mean the difference between life and death in the field. At 24, Maria had been deployed to Afghanistan for 8 months, serving with 3rd Platoon of Bravo Company. She was good at her job, methodical and calm under pressure, but in the eyes of many soldiers, she was still just the field medic. Lieutenant Jake Morrison watched Maria from across the compound as she loaded her gear into the Humvee. He respected her medical skills, but like most infantry officers, he saw her role as purely support. In his mind, the real fighting was done by riflemen, machine gunners, and explosives experts. Medics patch people up afterward. It was a common attitude that Maria had encountered throughout her military career, and she had learned to accept it without complaint. Staff Sergeant Tony Rodriguez approached the vehicle where Maria was securing her medical supplies. Rodriguez was a veteran of 3 deployments and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen combat many times. He nodded to Maria with professional courtesy, but focused his attention on the weapon systems and tactical equipment. To him, Maria was essential but secondary to the mission's primary objectives. The patrol briefing took place in the makeshift operations center, a reinforced concrete building that served as the nerve center for Base Viper. Major William Hayes stood before a map of the local area, pointing to various landmarks and potential trouble spots. The mission was routine reconnaissance, checking on local villages and maintaining a visible presence in the region. Intelligence suggested minimal enemy activity, making it what the soldiers called a milk run. Maria listened carefully to the briefing, noting the locations of the nearest medical evacuation points and the estimated response times for helicopter support. She always prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Her medical training had taught her to think several steps ahead, considering all the ways things could go wrong and how she would respond to each scenario. The convoy consisted of 4 vehicles carrying 36 soldiers from various specialties. Besides the infantry troops, there were communications specialists, explosive ordnance disposal experts, and interpreters. Maria was the only medic assigned to the patrol, a responsibility that weighed heavily on her shoulders. If anyone was wounded, she would be their lifeline until they could reach proper medical facilities. As the vehicles rolled through the gates of Base Viper, Maria felt the familiar tension that came with leaving the relative safety of the compound. The landscape outside was harsh and unforgiving, with rocky hills and sparse vegetation providing countless hiding spots for potential threats. The local population was generally friendly, but insurgent activities in the region made every patrol a calculated risk. The first village they visited was called Karbog, a small community of about 200 people who made their living through farming and livestock. The village elder, a dignified man named Haji Mahmud, greeted the patrol with reserved politeness. Through the interpreter, he assured the soldiers that there had been no unusual activity in the area and that his people continued to appreciate the coalition's efforts to bring stability to the region. Maria observed the interactions between the soldiers and villagers with interest. Children gathered around the convoy, curious about the foreign soldiers and their equipment. Some of the younger troops handed out candy and small toys, building goodwill that could prove valuable in gathering intelligence. Maria noticed several villagers who appeared to be suffering from minor medical conditions, but protocol prevented her from providing treatment unless it was an emergency. The second village, Kami Kalak, told a different story. The streets were notably empty, and those villagers who did appear seemed nervous and reluctant to engage with the patrol. Lieutenant Morrison ordered his men to be extra vigilant as they conducted their standard security sweep. Something felt off about the atmosphere, but there were no concrete signs of immediate danger. Maria found herself paying closer attention to details that others might miss. Her medical training had sharpened her observational skills, teaching her to notice subtle changes in behavior and appearance that could indicate underlying problems. The way people avoided eye contact, the speed with which they moved through the streets, and the absence of normal daily activities all suggested that something had the villagers spooked. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez positioned his men at key defensive points around the village center, while Lieutenant Morrison and the interpreter attempted to gather information from the local imam. The religious leader was polite, but provided only vague responses to questions about recent activities in the area. His reluctance to offer specific details confirmed the soldiers' suspicions that something was amiss. As the patrol prepared to move to their final destination, Maria noticed a young boy watching them from behind a low wall. The child appeared to be about 8 years old and seemed to be trying to get someone's attention without being obvious about it. When their eyes met, the boy made a subtle gesture toward the road leading out of the village, then quickly disappeared from view. The convoy resumed its movement along the dusty road that connected the villages to the main highway. This particular stretch of road passed through a narrow valley flanked by rocky outcroppings that provided excellent concealment for anyone wanting to remain unseen. It was exactly the type of terrain that made military commanders nervous, but reconnaissance patrols had used this route dozens of times without incident. Maria checked her radio equipment and ensured that her medical supplies were easily accessible. She had learned early in her deployment that preparation was everything in combat situations. The difference between having the right equipment ready and having to search for it could mean the difference between saving a life and losing it. Her methodical approach to organization had earned her the respect of the soldiers she served with. even if they still saw her primarily as support personnel. The attack came without warning at exactly 14:37 hours. The lead vehicle struck an improvised explosive device buried in the roadway, and the explosion sent it tumbling off the road into a shallow ravine. Simultaneously, small arms fire erupted from multiple positions in the surrounding hills, catching the convoy in a carefully planned crossfire. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site with tactical precision, maximizing their advantages while limiting the soldiers' options for response. Maria felt the shock wave from the explosion before she heard the sound. Her vehicle swerved violently as the driver sought cover behind a large boulder, and she could hear the distinctive crack of bullets passing overhead. Training took over immediately, and she began mentally cataloging her priorities: assess casualties, provide immediate medical attention, and coordinate evacuation procedures. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, requesting a situation report from all vehicles. The responses painted a grim picture. The lead vehicle was disabled with multiple casualties. The second vehicle had 2 wounded soldiers, and enemy fire was intensifying from at least 3 different positions. The patrol had gone from routine reconnaissance to life and death combat in a matter of seconds. Maria grabbed her medical bag and combat equipment, preparing to leave the relative safety of her vehicle to reach the wounded soldiers. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez immediately ordered her to stay put, explaining that the tactical situation was too dangerous for non-combat personnel to move around the battlefield. It was a reasonable order from a military perspective, but Maria knew that wounded soldiers were dying while she sat in safety. The sound of automatic weapons fire filled the air as the soldiers returned fire against their attackers. Maria could see muzzle flashes from several positions in the hills, indicating a well-coordinated enemy force that had planned this ambush carefully. The insurgents had achieved tactical surprise and held the high ground, giving them significant advantages in the engagement. Through her vehicle's window, Maria could see the lead Humvee smoking in the ravine about 50 meters away. She knew that at least 4 soldiers were trapped inside, and without immediate medical attention, some of them might not survive. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and conventional military doctrine called for establishing defensive positions and calling for reinforcement rather than attempting rescue operations under fire. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez coordinated the defense from his position behind the second vehicle, directing his soldiers to establish overlapping fields of fire that could suppress the enemy positions. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site well, but they had limited ammunition and no heavy weapons. If the soldiers could hold their positions long enough, air support or additional ground forces could tip the balance in their favor. Maria monitored the radio traffic, listening to the tactical updates and casualty reports. The situation was critical, but not hopeless, assuming that help arrived within a reasonable time frame. However, she also knew that the wounded soldiers in the lead vehicle could not wait for reinforcements. Every minute that passed without medical attention decreased their chances of survival. The enemy fire began to slacken slightly as the insurgents realized they had not achieved the quick victory they had hoped for. The American soldiers were well-trained and disciplined, and they were beginning to gain fire superiority despite their disadvantageous position. This was the moment when military training and experience began to overcome tactical surprise and terrain advantages. Lieutenant Morrison made the decision to call for medical evacuation while maintaining defensive positions. He radioed Base Viper with a detailed situation report, requesting immediate air support and helicopter evacuation for the wounded soldiers. The response confirmed that help was on the way, but it would take at least 20 minutes for aircraft to reach their location. Maria knew that 20 minutes was too long for soldiers with severe trauma injuries. Blast wounds from improvised explosive devices could cause massive internal bleeding, and without immediate intervention, victims could go into shock and die within minutes. Her medical training told her that every second counted, and waiting for the tactical situation to improve might mean watching people die who could have been saved. She began preparing her medical equipment for immediate use, organizing supplies according to the types of injuries she was most likely to encounter. Blast trauma typically resulted in penetrating wounds, broken bones, and severe bleeding. She had treated similar injuries during previous engagements, but never under such intense enemy fire. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez noticed her preparations and reminded her again that movement outside the vehicle was not authorized until the area was secured. It was a direct order from a senior non-commissioned officer, and military discipline required her to obey it without question. However, Maria also had a duty to provide medical care to wounded soldiers, and that duty sometimes conflicted with tactical considerations. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the lead vehicle. One of the soldiers trapped inside reported that the driver was unconscious and bleeding severely, and that two other occupants had sustained serious injuries in the explosion. The soldier's voice was strained but controlled, indicating that he was maintaining his composure despite the desperate circumstances. Maria made a decision that would change the course of her military career and her life. She grabbed her medical bag and opened the vehicle door, ignoring Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's shouted orders to stay put. Military protocol demanded that she follow orders, but her conscience demanded that she save lives, even if it meant putting herself in danger. The distance between her vehicle and the crashed Humvee was only 50 meters, but it might as well have been 50 miles given the amount of enemy fire crossing that space. Maria began moving in short rushes, using whatever cover was available while dragging her heavy medical bag behind her. Bullets kicked up dust around her feet, but she pressed forward with single-minded determination. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and several other soldiers provided covering fire, trying to suppress the enemy positions long enough for Maria to reach the wounded. Their disciplined volleys forced the insurgents to keep their heads down, creating brief windows of opportunity for movement. It was exactly the type of coordinated small unit action that separated professional soldiers from militia fighters. Maria reached the overturned vehicle and immediately began assessing the casualties. The driver was unconscious with a severe head wound and was losing blood rapidly. Two other soldiers had sustained multiple lacerations and possible internal injuries from the explosion. A fourth soldier was conscious, but had a compound fracture of his left leg that required immediate attention. Working under fire while treating multiple casualties was unlike anything Maria had experienced during training. She had to make rapid decisions about treatment priorities while bullets continued to snap overhead. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she applied tourniquets, started intravenous lines, and administered pain medication to the wounded soldiers. The conscious soldier provided security while Maria worked, keeping his rifle trained on potential enemy positions while she treated his wounded comrades. His calm professionalism under extremely difficult circumstances demonstrated the high quality of training that American soldiers received. Even wounded and trapped, he continued to fulfill his duty to protect his fellow soldiers. Maria established radio contact with Lieutenant Morrison, providing detailed medical status reports on each casualty. The information would be crucial for the incoming medical evacuation helicopter, allowing the flight crew to prepare appropriate equipment and medical personnel. Every piece of information could help save lives once the wounded soldiers reached proper medical facilities. The enemy fire gradually decreased as the insurgents realized they were facing determined resistance from well-trained soldiers. Their initial advantage of surprise had been overcome by superior training and equipment, and continuing the engagement risked exposure to incoming air support. Military experience had taught them to break contact when the tactical situation no longer favored them. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez moved his defensive perimeter forward, allowing other soldiers to provide closer support for Maria's medical efforts. The coordinated movement demonstrated the flexibility and adaptability that made American small units so effective in combat. Leaders at every level were making decisions and adjusting their tactics based on changing circumstances. As Maria continued treating the wounded soldiers, she found herself thinking beyond immediate medical care to broader tactical considerations. The ambush site had been carefully chosen, and the insurgents had demonstrated knowledge of patrol patterns and timing. Someone had provided them with intelligence about the convoy's route and schedule, raising questions about security procedures and local population loyalty. The sound of approaching aircraft announced the arrival of close air support, and the remaining enemy fire ceased immediately. The insurgents had achieved their primary objective of inflicting casualties on the American patrol, and they wisely chose to withdraw rather than face attack helicopters. The tactical situation had shifted decisively in favor of the coalition forces. Maria finished stabilizing the wounded soldiers just as the medical evacuation helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. The flight medics immediately took over patient care, loading the casualties aboard with practiced efficiency. Her field treatment had kept all 4 soldiers alive long enough to reach advanced medical care, and her actions had undoubtedly saved lives. As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, Maria found herself standing in the middle of what had been a battlefield minutes earlier. The adrenaline that had carried her through the crisis was beginning to fade, replaced by the realization of what had just happened. She had violated direct orders to leave safety and treat wounded soldiers under fire, and there would certainly be consequences for her actions. Lieutenant Morrison approached her with an expression that was difficult to read. As the patrol leader, he would have to write a report about the engagement that would include Maria's unauthorized movement under fire. Military discipline required that orders be followed without question, but the successful treatment of wounded soldiers complicated the situation significantly. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez joined them, and Maria prepared herself for the inevitable criticism of her actions. She had violated military protocol by leaving safety without authorization, and senior non-commissioned officers took such breaches of discipline very seriously. However, she also knew that her actions had saved lives, and she was prepared to accept whatever consequences resulted from her decisions. The return trip to Base Viper took place in relative silence as each soldier processed what had happened during the engagement. Maria cleaned and reorganized her medical equipment, but her mind kept returning to the moment when she had decided to leave safety and treat the wounded soldiers. It had been an instinctive decision based on medical training and personal conviction rather than military protocol. The after-action debriefing would take place once they returned to base, and Maria knew that her actions would be thoroughly reviewed by officers at multiple levels. The military chain of command took unauthorized actions seriously, even when they resulted in positive outcomes. Discipline and order were fundamental to military effectiveness, and exceptions to established procedures had to be carefully considered. However, Maria also knew that she had made the right decision. For soldiers were alive because she had chosen to risk her own safety to provide medical care. Her medical oath required her to preserve life whenever possible, and that obligation sometimes conflicted with military orders. She would face whatever consequences resulted from her actions with a clear conscience. As the convoy approached the gates of Base Viper, Maria reflected on how much had changed during a single patrol. She had begun the day as just another support soldier, but her actions under fire had demonstrated capabilities and courage that went far beyond her assigned role. The other soldiers in the patrol now looked at her differently, with a respect that she had not experienced before. The immediate crisis was over, but Maria suspected that the real challenges lay ahead. Her unauthorized actions had saved lives, but they had also raised questions about command authority and military discipline that would need to be addressed. The balance between medical obligations and military orders was not always clear, and her case would likely become a learning experience for the entire unit.